An enemy at the gates is easy to spot, but how do you protect your legacy when the person challenging your life's work enters your home as your son's bride, carrying a smile and a heart full of hidden motives? My name is Adeline. At 52, I've learned that life's most difficult chapters don't always begin with a loud conflict. They often start with a quiet change in the atmosphere. I am the founder of the Viridian Galatia, a high-end jewelry house that I built with integrity and a commitment to excellence. I have navigated many business challenges, but nothing prepared me for the subtle transformation that began the day my son, Caleb, introduced me to Isolde. To Caleb, Isolde was a brilliant partner, the person who would help him bring our traditional family values into a new era. To me, she was someone who viewed my years of dedication as an obstacle to her own rapid ambitions. She didn't arrive with a demand for power, she arrived with a series of gentle suggestions that slowly started to shift the balance of our home. Within weeks, the warmth of our family dinners was replaced by a calculated, formal distance. Isolde didn't openly disagree with me. Instead, she expressed concern for me. She spent her time convincing Caleb that my long-standing business methods were outdated, subtly painting a picture of a mother who was no longer in touch with the fast-moving world of modern commerce. The first major drop in this emotional journey happened during our company's 30th milestone celebration. I had spent weeks preparing a speech to honor the veteran craftsmen who have been the soul of the Galatia since its first day. As the gala lights dimmed and I prepared to take the stage, Isolde approached me in the hallway. She reached out and adjusted my scarf with a look of feigned kindness. "Adeline, dear," she said, her voice a soft, polite whisper, "I've noticed you've been a bit overwhelmed with the minor details lately. Why don't you let me handle the speech? We wouldn't want our partners to think the founder is losing her focus on the big picture, would we?" I turned to Caleb, hoping he would stand by the woman who had taught him everything he knew about our craft, but my heart sank when I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't frustration, it was a quiet, heartbreaking pity. "Maybe she's right, Mom," he whispered, placing a steadying hand on my arm. "You've worked so hard for so long. Maybe it's time you just enjoyed the evening as a guest of honor. Let Isolde be your voice tonight." In that second, the world I had built felt like it was being taken away from me. I wasn't being celebrated. I was being sidelined by the very person I raised to be my successor. The emotional weight was heavy. The realization that my own son was beginning to believe a narrative designed to isolate me. But Isolde made one mistake. She mistook my patience for a lack of awareness. While she stood on that stage, receiving the applause that belonged to 30 years of my labor, I sat in the shadows and observed. I noticed her secret meetings with representatives from the Horizon Group, a firm known for prioritizing quick financial gains over long-term stability. Isolde didn't care about the legacy of the Galatia. She saw our reputation as an asset to be utilized for her own goals. She thought I was a retired leader ready to step away, but she forgot that a woman who built her own foundation knows exactly how to keep it standing. That night, alone in my study, I made a decision. I wouldn't respond to Isolde with harsh words that would only drive Caleb away. I would respond with the very progress she claimed to represent. I would allow her to take the lead she so desperately wanted, but I would make sure she had to face the true responsibilities that come with it. I would play the role of the supportive mother while I prepared a life lesson that would help Caleb see the difference between a genuine partner and a temporary ambition. "Isolde," I thought to myself in the quiet room, "you think you've taken my seat at the table, but you're about to find out that a master of the craft knows how to spot an imitation from a mile away, and the true value of a legacy is something you haven't yet learned to appreciate." The journey was no longer about defending my position. It was about protecting my son's future, and for the first time in months, I felt a calm, steady strength return to my heart. As the weeks followed the gala, I retreated into a persona of quiet compliance. I spent my mornings in the conservatory tending to my orchids while the sounds of progress echoed from the corporate wings of the estate. Isolde was moving fast. She had convinced Caleb to let her oversee the transition to a new automated inventory system provided by the Horizon Group. To Caleb, it was a leap into the future. To me, it was a dangerous gamble that replaced our master craftsman's intuition with cold, unfeeling algorithms. The emotional roller coaster took another turn when Caleb came to visit me on a rainy Tuesday. He looked tired, his eyes lacking the spark that usually accompanied his talk of gemstones. He sat across from me, sipping the chamomile tea I had brewed. "Mom," he started, hesitating as he looked at the floor. "Isolde thinks it's time we move the primary account access to her office. She says it will streamline the new projects. I told her I'd ask you for the master keys." The pain of that moment was a slow ache. He wasn't just asking for a set of keys, he was asking me to hand over the final seal of my autonomy. I saw the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between the loyalty he felt for me and the future Isolde had promised him. I could have said no. I could have shown him the red flags I had already uncovered about the Horizon Group's hidden fees and unstable software. But I knew that if I did, Isolde would simply tell him I was being controlling again. "Of course, Caleb," I said, my voice steady and warm, hiding the storm inside. I reached into my desk and pulled out the silver key card that granted total access to the Viridian Galatea's digital vaults. As I handed him the card, I felt a piece of my heart go with it. I wasn't just giving up power, I was letting my son walk towards a cliff, hoping that the fall would wake him up before he hit the bottom. Isolde's triumph was immediate. With the master keys in her possession, she bypassed the traditional audit trails I had spent decades refining. She began shifting our sourcing contracts away from the small ethical mines in the valley and towards the massive high-volume warehouses managed by her associates at the Horizon Group. She was trading our soul, the story behind every stone, for a higher margin of profit. She thought she was being efficient. She thought she was outsmarting the old woman who cared too much about the history of a diamond. The night of the investor's reveal arrived with a cold, sharp elegance. The grand ballroom of the estate was filled with the city's financial elite, all gathered to witness the new direction of the Viridian Galatea. Isolde was in her element, dressed in a gown that shimmered like a polished obsidian, moving through the crowd with the confidence of someone who thought they had already won the race. Caleb stood by her side, but the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes anymore. He looked like a man trying to convince himself that he was happy. I arrived late, dressed in a simple, timeless charcoal suit. I didn't seek the spotlight. I stood near the back, a quiet observer of the empire I had built. The emotional high in the room was palpable. Isolde had spent thousands on decorations and digital displays, creating an atmosphere of futuristic success. But as I watched her, I saw the small signs of pressure she was trying to hide, the way her hand tightened around her glass when a senior auditor approached, the way she checked her phone every few minutes. As she reached the climax of her speech, preparing to unveil the new Horizon Signature collection, the digital screen behind her flickered. It wasn't the brilliant display of gemstones she expected. Instead, a series of internal audit flags began to scroll across the screen. These were the documents I had quietly prepared, the ones showing that the high-quality stones sourced through the Horizon Group had failed secondary authenticity tests for ethical origin. The room went silent. The air felt heavy with a sudden freezing tension. Isolde's face went pale, her mask of perfection slipping for the first time. She looked frantically at Caleb, who was staring at the screen in total disbelief. "It was the technical glitch," she stammered, trying to regain control. But it wasn't a glitch. It was the truth finally catching up. One of our most respected investors, a man who had known my father, stood up. Caleb, his voice grave, these reports suggest that our latest acquisitions are not up to the Galatea standard. Is this the modernization we were promised? The emotional weight of that moment was devastating. I watched my son, my brave, hard-working Caleb, crumble under the weight of the realization that he had handed the keys of our family's honor to someone who didn't value it. He looked at Isolde, searching for an explanation, but all he found was her anger. It was the software, she hissed at him, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The old systems Adeline insisted on must have corrupted the data. I walked forward, my footsteps steady on the marble floor. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I didn't sabotage anything, Isolde. I simply stepped back and allowed your efficiency to speak for itself. You wanted the keys to the kingdom, but you forgot that a kingdom is held together by the loyalty of its people and the integrity of its name. In the days following the disastrous reveal, the Viridian Galatea felt less like a luxury estate and more like a courthouse. The silence that once had been my refuge now felt heavy, suffocating the hallways where laughter used to dwell. Isolde didn't apologize. Instead, she went into a defensive frenzy. She locked herself in the home office, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her eyes as she tried to scrub the digital trail she had left behind. But the modern systems she had touted were now her greatest enemy. Every transaction, every bypassed audit, and every shortcut was etched into the server like a scar. The emotional roller coaster hit a new peak of tension when Caleb came to me in my library. He didn't sit down. He stood by the window, watching the rain lash against the glass, his shoulders slumped as if carrying the weight of the entire building. "The board is calling for an emergency meeting, Mom," his voice hollow. "They're talking about a total restructuring. Isolde, she's telling them that I was the one who signed off on the Horizon contracts. She's claiming she was just following my lead." The sting of her betrayal was expected, but seeing the hurt in my son's eyes still felt like a fresh wound. Isolde was no longer just trying to take the company. She was willing to sacrifice the man she claimed to love to save her own skin. This was the moment I had prepared for, the life lesson that would define Caleb's character. I walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Caleb, when you hold a diamond to the light, you don't look for its beauty first, you look for its flaws. You've seen the flaw in your partner now. The question is, what are you going to do with the truth?" The following morning, the board members gathered in the grand oak-paneled conference room. Isolde arrived first, dressed in a sharp, intimidating suit, clutching a leather portfolio filled with evidence of Caleb's supposed negligence. She spoke with a rehearsed urgency, pointing fingers at the ambitious young CEO who had moved too fast. Caleb sat at the end of the table, silent, absorbing the accusations like a man in a trance. The board looked at me, waiting for the founder to speak, to save the day, or perhaps to join the chorus of blame. I stood up, not with the anger they expected, but with a calm, steady resolve. I didn't open a laptop or show a graph. I simply pulled out a small handwritten ledger from my pocket, the old-fashioned way of keeping records that Isolde had laughed at. Isolde is right about one thing: mistakes were made, but a leader doesn't just sign papers, a leader protects the integrity of the brand. I turned the ledger toward the board, showing the manual cross-references I had kept of every stone that entered our vault during her tenure. Then I played a recording, not a secret wiretap, but a simple backup of the security feed from the vault, which Isolde had forgotten was on an independent analog loop. It showed her, late at night, replacing the ethical certificates with the ones from the Horizon Group. The room went cold. Isolde's frantic explanations died in her throat. The modern strategist was undone by the very traditional security she had dismissed as obsolete. Isolde was asked to leave the premises immediately, pending a full legal audit. She didn't leave with grace. She left with a storm of bitter words, blaming the old guard for being stuck in the past. But as the door closed behind her, the real emotional work began. Caleb looked at me, tears of shame and clarity in his eyes. He realized that in his search for the future, he had nearly destroyed the very foundation that made that future possible. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, the words trembling. "I let her take everything." I looked at my son, seeing the man he was finally becoming. "She didn't take everything, Caleb. She took the illusions. Now we have the truth, and with the truth, we can actually build something that lasts." The lesson was harsh, but as I watched him stand up and apologize to the board, I knew he would never be fooled by a counterfeit again. We were no longer just a mother and a son, we were partners again, but this time, the trust was forged in fire. The days following Isolde's departure were not filled with the triumph I had expected, but with a heavy, dust-settling quiet. Rebuilding a reputation is like repairing a shattered vase. Even if you use the finest gold to seal the cracks, the scars remain as a reminder of the fragility of trust. The Viridian Galatia was under intense scrutiny. The media, ever hungry for a fall from grace, hovered around our flagship store like hawks. Caleb spent 16 hours a day in the vaults, personally inspecting every stone that had entered our inventory during the Horizon era. He was no longer the boy who looked for shortcuts. He was a man obsessed with penance. The emotional depth of this chapter began when Caleb discovered that the damage went deeper than just unethical sourcing. Isolde had quietly liquidated a portion of our legacy reserve, the private collection of rare gems my husband and I had set aside for our family's future. It was her final act of spite, a parting gift of betrayal. When Caleb told me, his voice didn't break. He didn't cry. He simply sat in the chair across from my desk and looked at his empty hands. His voice was a low, gravelly whisper. "I traded our history for a ghost, Mom," he said. "How do we fix a void that large?" I didn't offer him empty comfort. I led him down to the basement of the estate, to the original workshop where my father had first taught me to cut stone. The air was thick with the scent of oil and old metal. "We fix it the only way we know how, Caleb," I replied, lighting the old jeweler's lamps. "We work. We don't buy our way back into the market. We create our way back." This was the ultimate life lesson, that wealth can be stolen, but the craft, the ability to turn raw earth into something divine, is a treasure no one can take from you. As we worked through the night, the news broke that Isolde hadn't disappeared. She had joined forces with a rival firm called Vanguard Lux and was attempting to sue the Galatia for wrongful termination and emotional distress. She was trying to flip the narrative, painting herself as a young innovator who was silenced by a jealous in-law mother. It was a classic move, a desperate attempt to stay relevant by burning the bridge she had already crossed. The board was panicked, fearing a prolonged legal battle that would drain our remaining resources. But Isolde forgot that I had spent 30 years playing the long game. While she was busy filing lawsuits and giving interviews, I was reaching out to the Elder Guild, the traditional suppliers she had insulted. I didn't ask for their money, I asked for their partnership. I offered them a seat at our table in exchange for their support in verifying our new corrected inventory. The emotional roller coaster swung back upward as each one after another of the giants of the industry, men and women who had known me for decades, stood behind the Galatia. Their endorsement was a shield that no lawyer of Isolde's could pierce. The turning point came when Caleb suggested a redemption auction. We wouldn't hide our mistakes, we would showcase them. We would sell the Horizon stones at cost, clearly labeled as imperfect acquisitions, and donate all proceeds to ethical mining charities. It was a bold, transparent move that went against every corporate instinct of self-preservation. It was the moment I knew Caleb had finally surpassed me. He wasn't just protecting the brand, he was protecting the soul of the business. Isolde's lawsuit crumbled within weeks when the Elder Guild produced their records proving that she had knowingly bypassed quality checks. Her case was dismissed. But the true retribution wasn't in a courtroom. It was the day of the auction. As Caleb stood on that stage, speaking with a humility and strength I had never seen, the room was filled with the very investors who had walked out weeks before. They weren't there for the gems, they were there for the man he had become. I watched from the wings, my heart finally at peace. The fire was hot and the wind was cold, but the forge had worked. The Galatia wasn't just a company anymore. It was a testament to the fact that integrity, once lost, can be found again through honesty and hard work. As the final gavel fell, marking the most successful day in our history, I realized that the architect of this retribution wasn't just me, it was the truth itself. The final stroke of a master jeweler is often the lightest, for they know that once the true character of a stone is revealed, there is no need for further force. The auction's success had cleared the clouds, but the landscape of the Viridian Galatea had changed forever. We were no longer the untouchable titan of the industry. We were something better. We were a company that had looked into the abyss of its own mistakes and had the courage to climb back out. The redemption auction didn't just save our finances, it restored the trust that Isolde had so nearly extinguished. In the aftermath, the emotional resolution I had been waiting for finally arrived. Caleb walked into my office on a quiet Sunday evening. The estate was silent, the only sound being the ticking of the grandfather clock. He didn't come to ask for instructions or permission. He came with a document, a new constitution for the company that placed ethical sourcing and artisan transparency at the absolute core of our operations. He looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw a man who didn't need a mother's hand to guide his pen. He had found his own moral compass in the wreckage of his betrayal. The final life lesson was for Isolde. Her fall was not loud or explosive. It was a slow, inevitable fading into the shadows she had tried to create for me. After her lawsuit was dismissed and her reputation with Vanguard Lux disintegrated due to the evidence we presented, she found that the world of luxury is a very small place for those who lack integrity. The doors that had once flown open for her were now locked with the very keys of efficiency she had championed. She had tried to build a life on the surface, forgetting that a foundation of sand cannot support a house of gold. I heard later that she had left the city, an uninvited guest who had finally run out of tables to sit at. I decided that my time at the head of the table had reached its natural conclusion, not because I was tired or forgetful as she had tried to claim, but because I had completed my greatest work. I had raised a leader. In a private ceremony in our original workshop, I handed Caleb the heavy gold-embossed seal of the Viridian Galatea. "Caleb," I said, my voice thick with a pride that was finally untainted by worry, "you've felt the pressure, you've seen the flaws, and you've chosen the truth. The empire is yours, not because you inherited it, but because you earned it back." The emotional roller coaster had finally come to a smooth, steady stop. I stood on the balcony of the estate, watching the sunset over the vineyards, a glass of wine in my hand, and a heart that was finally at peace. I had played the role of the fading matriarch, the silent observer, and the architect of a difficult retribution. I had lost a daughter-in-law, but I had regained a son and secured a legacy that would now outlive us both. As I looked at the shimmering lights of the city, I realized that the most valuable thing I owned wasn't the diamonds in the vault or the estate on the hill. It was the knowledge that integrity is a fire that cleanses everything it touches. Isolde had tried to take my home, but she had only succeeded in helping me build a better one. In the end, we are all like gemstones, I whispered to the evening breeze. It isn't the light that shines on us that defines our value, but the clarity that remains when the world tries to dim our glow. The Viridian Galatea was safe, my son was a man of honor, and I, Adeline, was finally free to enjoy the garden I had spent a lifetime planting.